right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We just did a really fun episode that's gotten a lot of attention on Tuesday with Father Tom Soroka. I'm having trouble speaking English today. Father Tom was here. And today, it says part two, but I think I should have called it take two because we had so many tech issues last time that it kind of was one of those train wrecks that we kind of tried to slog our way through and ended up just kind of having to abandon ship. So we are back with Joshua Davidson and Hannah, and I am just kind of here as the host. So I'm just going to kind of sit here and listen and not say a whole lot and let them do the talking. But welcome back, Josh and Hannah, and hopefully this time we can get through this conversation without any technology demons in the process. So, Hannah, why don't you introduce yourself? Then we'll have Josh introduce himself, and we will kick off this conversation.
Okay. Thanks for hosting this, Amber. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this. My name is Hannah. I am just mostly a wife and a mother, and I'm a veterinarian in my spare time. But I'm just really interested in theology and the Bible and that kind of stuff too. So that's it. That's me.
That's cool. I did not know you were a veterinarian. That is actually very neat. My name is Josh. I am here often enough that I'm assuming most people know who I am. And if not, it's probably your fault. But I'll say that I am one of the main founders and hosts of Faith Unaltered and the host of Cosmic Corner. And I am just happy to be here today. We did try to do this last time, and I did quite a bit of talking because the technology was being unkind to Hannah. And so I am going to try to back off a little bit also to give Hannah a little bit more room to explain herself. Because in fairness, I had way more time to explain myself than she got. So out of fairness, I'll concede most of the time so that Hannah could kind of just explain herself and we can get a little bit closer to at least level ground of understanding before we talk about anything being a disagreement necessarily. So yeah, just happy to be here and happy Thursday.
Sounds great. Okay, I think I just will give like a summary overview of where I'm at currently in the way that I've been seeing male and female relationships, or just like who we are in Christ, that kind of a thing. I just for background, I have been raised in a very Christian home. Fairly edging towards a little bit more fundamental. So my upbringing and all the way I've read the Bible and been explained the Bible and studied the Bible had been very on the complementarian edge of, this sort of way of looking at male-female relationships and how we operate with one another. So I'm very familiar with the view. I'm very familiar with the arguments from scripture, and I'm very familiar with the ways different people live it out. So, and that is interesting because there's a whole range on that end, right? A lot of us hold beliefs that we don't actually, we operate out of them very differently. So that throws a extra complication into trying to figure out how we operate best together. So I think it was probably a couple of years ago where I started looking back into the arguments because they became more relevant for me in both my relationship and also so a lot of like friends relationships around me. And I think it was actually when Mike Winger posted his big long debate about women. So I listened to all of that and I read all of his sightings and followed up on a lot of that stuff. And that's what actually got me interested in doing more research, because I felt like it was very lacking. So things that I thought were settled, I realized, oh, there's a bigger body of I don't know, views, a bigger body of ways to interpret or read the Bible, and a lot more information that I hadn't run across before. So that began me on a process of like looking through all of these things, and ultimately to coming to a place where I walked away from that view, that way of looking at the word, and that allowed me to actually have some really good growth in my personal relationship. So I've seen very good fruit from leaving that way of understanding marriage. So I think the main difference that I have from who I was 3 years ago and how I would describe what marriage is was very, very simply, I would have described marriage as a relationship of where two become one, but that oneness didn't erase the distinction of a leader and a follower. So like very specific roles in who a male and a female are, so that there would be a definite hierarchy and a definite idea of a right to make decisions or lead, and then a role of following, and that would be the female role. So that's how I would describe where what I believed before, and the way that I live my life. I would also, just to throw out for information, say that I definitely ordered my life in that way as well. I didn't just believe it; I really did live that way. So with what I see now, I've recognized that I don't think that was the intent of the passages, and for me, I had to come at it from exegetical or just through proof of the Bible, because I really do feel like if it's there, if that's what God revealed to us, I'm willing to live in that way, whatever that is. So that I had to see that there's a possibility that it was different first. And then once I saw that, I recognized a lot of ways in which the way that our relationship had operated was not ideal. And it was me stepping up into just a full partnership, or taking ownership for who I was and the direction that our marriage was going. Made a lot of difference. And so I would just say the difference between that view and the view that I hold now is that I don't see a difference between authority in a male and female. I see a difference. I would say that it's not an equality view, as in like we all are the same. We're definitely not the same. We are definitely have different strengths and different weaknesses and different amounts of power in different areas, but we would use our different powers and our strengths and our gifting to the lifting up of the other person. And we are both equally responsible for who we are in the marriage and the direction of the marriage as a whole, the oneness of it, versus there being a difference of leadership in the marriage. So, I mean, I guess that's the brief overview. If you want to ask more questions so I can clarify or whatever, if that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, praise God that you were able to see healing and growth because you had further revelation. Like, nobody should knock that. Praise God. I hope that everybody who listens to this hears the fact that the first thing that somebody should say when someone says, God took me out of something. Yes, good, fantastic. Thank the Lord for that. Especially if it's something that brought you closer to Him. Thank God for that. I can say that there are things that I have experienced that brought me closer to God that I have since changed my mind about as well. So I'm not knocking that, but I am saying God can use what He wants, and praise God for that. And so thanks for telling some of your testimony, by the way. So that's good to have it as a context from your lived experience as well. It's not just like, I thought, what the heck, I'm going to rework this whole thing and figure out if I can find my own way to interpret the Bible. Like, it makes sense to say, I saw this thing and said, that doesn't seem to scratch the itch. I need to find out more. That's exactly the right approach. And I think anybody who's listening who doesn't take that approach, and when you hear something that doesn't seem to sit right with you, you have a tendency to cram it away and ignore it. That's where your doubts come from later. Don't do that.
That's true.
You should be able to confront things that you either do or don't understand, and even things that you found unquestionable at some point. You find yourself questioning them. You don't have to feel like you're questioning the validity of God to ask questions about the Bible. So I applaud you for that. I am curious how you would, like, let's say with a kind of technicality, describe or define authority and leadership. Those seem to be two different things to you, in terms of, like, one thing is appropriate, but the other one doesn't flow from the other, something like that, right? Where it sounds like you're saying there's an equal share of authority, which allows for the man and the woman to take responsibility for themselves, which I wholesale, totally. Yeah. My walk is mine in my walk. In my marriage, I'm bound to my wife. And so my walk also belongs to her, but she doesn't own my walk the way that I do. It's my responsibility, right? That doesn't make me not her responsibility. But first and foremost, my responsibility is me. My responsibility is also to her. She is my responsibility, but I don't own her. She's not mine. She's me, right? And so that's the way that I'm looking at it, is male and female as one means that she's not mine. She's me, right? So we agree there. But I am curious about what you mean by authority specifically, like in a more technical sense. And I'm also curious about what you mean by leadership in a more technical sense. Because you acknowledge that we have different weaknesses and strengths. And so there are times when someone needs to, let's say, step up or fill a gap that the other person would have because of those strengths and weaknesses, right? I am not a very organized and administrative person. My wife pays the bills with my money. I am not good at remembering anything. I am totally scatterbrained. And so I am absolutely just kind of in the flapping in the wind most of the time, as far as trying to keep up with what's in here and remember things and do them on time. She's very good with that. So that's something that in our own personal experience, those normative roles are absolutely reversed, right? And so to me, those roles themselves are kind of permeable, right? While I fully affirm the idea of hierarchy, perhaps not in the fundamentalist sense that you did before, but I fully affirm the idea of a biblical hierarchy and the differences in roles, but there's still some permeability in those roles. So I'm kind of curious about just some of that stuff, because I like what you said, and I actually don't, so far, I don't know that I have much disagreement.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm just taking the straight, like, dictionary definition of authority. So that's maybe where we differ. But so I would say that authority would be the right to make the decisions or enforce the decisions or enforce something. So it would be the right, the positional right to do something. So just like I would say the president has the right to start a war, I guess, or whatever. I don't know what he has the right to do, but that would be the view of what authority would be, the right to do something. So, and then I would say
is that power. Is that congruous? Like, is there a congruity here between, like, a governmental authority and a personal authority? Are those identical here?
Well, they're definitionally similar, but they're different, right? So, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that there are all kinds of authorities in the world that we live in, right? So I'm not saying there's no such thing as authority.
I guess that's what I mean by technical, is in terms of specifically in the realm of marriage within the home and inside the, let's say, the envelope of function that is required to make a marriage something that lives and doesn't die, right? Like you have to, you know what I mean? Like what inside of that framework specifically, what is authority? Because it's not merely the same thing as governmental authority and mere right.
Right. I would say that I had learned it as defined as that there has to be one decision maker, and that person would be the husband. as a view of headship. Headship would involve the authority in the marriage. So the authority of the home, the authority of the marriage, the authority of the things, which would mean the right to make the decisions. And it would be flowing down from the husband that all things could be delegated or decided. So it wouldn't mean that the husband was necessarily doing everything, but it would just mean that would have to go through him, or he has the right to set whatever that would mean for the rest of the home.
What would give him the right?
I mean, I was taught it as the Bible. God had given him the right, and that the word, and it was pretty much wrapped in the idea of like headship.
So there was no basis for his right. It was just kind of an arbitrary.
No. It would be God's headship, right? So it would be kind of the idea that 1 Corinthians 11 was talking about an authority flow. So 1 Corinthians 11, if God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of man is the head of woman. And if that's a flow of authority, that would be the grounding for that teaching or that basis.
So it's actually not at all like government.
Oh, no. I mean, there's governmental models that, like monarchies that would have the king has the right to rule as he pleases over his country. And then he would have, distributed power in different ways, but he has the right. So it would be like a monarchy. So there's reflections in the natural world around us. But the grounding would be that I learned, or that I knew it from, would be from scripture in that interpretation.
Okay. I think I understand why you saw holes in it. That's for sure.
Okay.
I would say, based on your answer, there's no basis for male authority then. It's just because there's a say-so. That's insufficient for an answer. There's a huge gap.
Yeah. Okay. So I missed a part too. So it would be say-so, but it would also be that they ground that in creation, right? That male is created in a way that they are essentially leaders, and women are essentially followers, or however you want to make those terms. But so they would ground it in the substance of creation, of saying that we are created to be essentially different in that way.
Right. So it's just still divine fiat because God said so.
I mean,
like, there's no reason why God would have made male in that way and female in that way. There's like no basis for it. It's just because God did that, and that's why.
Yeah. I mean, I guess
that's a crappy reason. I agree. That's a crappy reason. I would reject that too. I think that's silly. I do. I think that's silly. I join you in rejecting that. Yeah, for sure. As far as authority being a right, I would say authority is more so an acceptance of obligation. Authority, in terms of the biblical hierarchy, so far as I understand it, is something that is based not in right, but in self-sacrifice. And standing on rights is the opposite of self-sacrifice. So they're not compatible.
Okay. I hear ya. How would that make the male and the female different in authority?
Because, well, that's let's say circumstantial in the way that it plays out in the anecdote. But ultimately, there is no majority vote in a party of two. And so one person is going to take the responsibility for the failure, or both people are going to dissent. And so it's very difficult to see how those things would play out without a final say. But long before you got there, because this is at the bottom end of dissension where that would play out. That's not a normative example. And so day to day, if you're living in so much dissension that everything you do is a dictatorship, that's not a marriage. That's crazy. That's a war zone, right? So that's not functional. That's not biblical hierarchy. Biblical hierarchy is, if I come home and I see that my children are bothering my wife, and my wife has some sort of just an attitude issue right now. Maybe she's upset. Maybe she's sore. Something's up. It's like, I can give myself an intervention moment to be like, babe, let's go over here and bring her away and use my physical presence, my voice, my everything that I am doing, everything that I bring to the room to bring order back to the room. Because that's a strength that I was granted, not only just as a male, but in general as a calm person. I have a tendency to bring that to a room. Unless I'm very impassioned and then I get wild, and that's totally different. It's a very different energy, but that's not something that I would like bring to a room where everybody's already overwhelmed, right? So if I notice those things, I, let's say, break in and do things operatively. I have a power over the room. Let's say my wife, if she comes home and notices I'm in a bad mood, can try the same thing, right? But the kids do not respond to her in the same way they respond to me, which is why they bother her in a way that they don't bother me, right? And so this plays out in a larger sense with the family unit as well as the marriage. But within those things, we give each other the space to communicate. And if there's a dissension and it's one that's going to be my way or the highway on both ends, it doesn't work. And so there has to be one person who's ultimately in responsibility over the decision and takes the blame if things go wrong. And I could lay that on my wife, but I don't think that that's fair to her. I also don't see a precedent for doing so outside of just if she has a greater wisdom, then I can defer to that. Right. But that's not that's not like an authority hierarchy thing. I'm attaching this specifically to the to the taking on of responsibility, not to the taking of power, because it's not about power in a biblical hierarchy.
Okay, so that's where we agree. So I just want to go back though. So I agree we have different powers as, even as individuals, right? So
and personality type too, but yeah. Sure.
So power isn't the issue. We're not all the same. But what we do with our power, I think that's the question, number one. And like you're saying, we should be using our power for the betterment of the other. And that's where we totally agree. The difference is that I used to, and you did say at the beginning, you defined it as the reason there needs to be some kind of authority is somebody has to make a decision.
In times of dissent. Yeah.
Okay.
In times of like unreconcilable conflict, there's no majority vote in a party of two. And yes. So it either that's where it kind of comes to a head. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's in an extreme.
Sure. But that's where we can find where the important quality is that we're on different sides of, right? So is that the extreme ends a lot of times. So that's why a lot of times this goes to that question of like, who's the final decision maker? And that's kind of how we've defined authority. And it sounds like you defined authority in that way as well.
No, I don't define authority by that.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well,
I would say that's the edge of authority. That's not a defining feature of it.
Okay. So that's the edge of authority. And this is the only part where I think we maybe disagree, because I fully agree that we have different strengths and powers and that we use them in service of the other. So in your example, I would say, absolutely, if you are a calming presence and your kids respond to you in a certain way, then you have a responsibility, because you have been given this power, to use it in a way that serves your family. And your wife, likewise, if she has a strength or a power that you don't have, she then has a responsibility to use that strength or power in a way that serves you and the kids too. So that's why I would see it as an idea of like two people making a whole, that each part is essential to the life of the whole or the life of the marriage, versus the idea of decision maker, final decision maker. And the reason why I no longer see that as a part of this is because if you have I think we're looking at the wrong framework. I think we're looking at a live body that needs both the head and the body to be alive. Without one or the other, we're dead, right? It's not a marriage. So I think we're looking at the wrong paradigm. And as decision maker, right? And so if one is always the decision maker, even if they only 1% of the time pull that decision making card, you are saying that they have the responsibility for that, for the whole marriage. So essentially the entire responsibility for the health of that marriage falls on that one person.
Only if the marriage is entirely dissension.
Well, I mean, in either case, if you're saying that it is the decision maker's responsibility for there not to be dissension, or to, you know, to right the ship, I just don't see that. I see that the both of them, it's both their responsibility to bring all of that to. And I think when we stand before God, he's not going to say, how did your wife do? He's going to say, how did you do? And and when your wife stands before the Lord, same thing. He's not going to say, how did your husband do? He's going to say, how did you do in this relationship? So so for that reason, and for the other reason that I think either of us are fully capable of being deceived. So if all of the decision making goes to one party, which means, you know, they can choose to use it or not, but it essentially rests, the responsibility of decision making rests on the one party. I think that, like you said, mostly in an unhealthy relationship where there's more dissension, or there's sin, or there's deception, or whatever's going on, that is going to, I feel like it's just going to remove the possibility that the other can step up when they need to, or that they both are going to work together. And I don't see marriage as a entity that needs decisions made. I see marriage as a organism that needs both people to grow to understand one another, versus a like a business or a military or a, you know, any other form of worldly power that we would talk about, or structures that we would talk about, where you absolutely do, for efficiency's sake, for, you know, growth's sake, you need somebody at the helm of the ship. And I don't think marriage is supposed to be that picture, but I could be totally wrong there too.
Well, I agree. It's not supposed to be that picture. It's only our modern dysfunction that makes it that. To be honest with you, this is all anecdotal stuff that you and I agree on is all just crappy behavior. Men that are self-entitled, self-referential abusers should be laughed out of court. To me, they're not men. They're not good husbands. That's not marriage. That's abuse. Like, being in authority doesn't mean all the decision power is in one person's hand. It means the extreme end of when things are falling apart, one person needs to be the glue, or nobody will be. That's what I mean. And so what I mean is taking responsibility for the, like, as you said, I have a power to do something. I explained in my analogy that I have a power to change the atmosphere of the house. You said I have a responsibility to do so. It is meeting that responsibility that grants me the authority. It's not merely having the ability. It's taking responsibility properly and using that authority properly that makes it biblical authority. Authority is just especially if we're talking about in the generic sense, the use or the right of power. Might makes right in that sense. I can overpower anybody in my home physically. I'm more than capable of doing that. But that's not how it operates. And if it ever got there, something's gone horribly wrong before then. And that's not a marriage anymore. You know what I mean? So that's not even like all of that stuff isn't even in view when I say biblical hierarchy. None of that's in view. When I say my wife and I have the power of decision together, when we're functioning as one flesh, that's exactly what happens. And so there doesn't need to be a ploy for struggle or power. We're not in competition with one another. Like you said, you're one organism. However, when the organism begins to attack itself, like some of the sicknesses we see, there needs to be some part of the body that withstands, or it all dies. And so I believe that that's why God made men really fortified in an emotional sense. We feel rather dead a lot of the time. People think that men are unfeeling, but it's because they're fortified. I am far more capable of withstanding emotional and relational and financial hardship and abuse and just the weight. I accept that, not because I want it or simply because God gave me the power, but because I see the gap in my absence. There's nobody else to take that weight, and I don't want to give it to my wife. That's the self-sacrifice that gives the authority. That's where the right would come from, is from that self-sacrifice. That's why she should trust me, is because that's what makes me trustworthy. And trust is the basis, not right. You see what I'm saying? So biblical hierarchy is based on trust, not based on power.
Okay. So I guess then my question would be, do you feel like a husband is capable of also bringing disease into a marriage that a
Absolutely.
wife would have to take responsibility and step up to address?
Yep.
Okay.
If
So
I could be
how
very vulnerable, there's a part of my testimony that's very relevant to this. Amber probably knows what I'm about to say. Before I was very serious about my Christian walk, I was very serious about doctrine, and I knew God like a celebrity, but I did not know God very deeply. And I had been a terrible example to my wife, who grew up in a home where Jesus Christ was a cuss word. And so the beginning of my marriage was a failure because I had not fulfilled this role in any capacity. And so I did have to take responsibility for that. I did have to defer. I had to forgive her by taking responsibility for what I had allowed in my own home. And so a lot of these things, when this was happening, were me, in, let's say, in a societal sense, I was the victim of the situation. And yet, by bearing the ultimate responsibility for the situation, not only did I heal better, I brought my wife further into Christ. I healed the marriage, and we're far more married now than we ever were. And she knows that I'm the kind of person who would literally put myself on the line to make her better, to make her safe, and to make sure that she has what she needs to, and she'll have more than I have, no matter what. And she trusts me with that because I've given myself over to that, and I've proven that I'm trustworthy with that. If I wasn't trustworthy with that, her submission would be foolishness at best, or at least submission to God in the face of foolishness, kind of like Sarah and Abraham. You know what I mean? Like, I've been a real piece of work in my life, so I know what it is to be a failure of a husband. That's where I started at. It was not good. You know what I mean? So to turn that around and be able to build from the broken pieces something that's genuinely very much more functional, I would say that came from the basis of taking responsibility, even for things that I had no control over directly.
So I guess that's where I would say, wow, that's a thank you for sharing that. And it's beautiful. I just would think that it would be this similar thing. Like if you could put yourself on the other end of that, I don't know, like in other relationships, there's different things that go on, right? But I just think it's very similar. I think both the male and the female, when they're fully submitted to God and when they're using their gifts for one another, that's where we see what Paul is describing, which is in Christ, we're to be one, you know, and that isn't about who makes decisions or who has more responsibility. It seems to be about be about both of us using what we have for the other person. And so just like you described, you had to own up to how you had failed. I mean, I think that's essential to both parties.
It is.
Yeah. And so I just don't see a difference, I guess, is what I'm saying. The one difference that I think that we would agree that we have is the idea of decision maker or final decision maker. And the reason I feel like that fails the test of life is because either of us could be fully deceived. So for me to be the only decision maker in my marriage is making it more likely that our marriage fails. Or for
that's what I mean, though. There isn't a soul. There isn't an only decision maker.
Okay. So there's more responsibility though in your view?
I take more responsibility. That's right.
more responsibility than your wife
Yes.
for the success of your marriage?
No, for my part in being the backbone of what made the marriage what it is now. My inaction made it paralyzed. My repentance helped to give it backbone. And it's supported by my continual acceptance of responsibility and her continual submission and trust, as well as her continual trustworthiness and responsibility and authority, because she bears those things also, and especially in relation to the children and the inner workings of the home, rather than the foreign relation with me going outside and being the thing that bars the way between the world coming in and destroying my home. I'm that line of defense, right? But beyond me from the inside, she's the line of defense. And so in that case, there is no difference. But functionally, I'm the castle wall and she's the treasure chest. You see what I mean? Like a treasure chest is a guardian for the treasure, but the castle wall guards both the treasure chest and the treasure. And that doesn't mean that the treasure chest is less valuable. It means that the castle is more expendable. That's what the self-sacrifice is.
Okay.
I'm ascribing to her greater value.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out like how our difference could be talked about, because I think
well, let me just ask, I guess, more directly. Do you think that somebody who is embodying what I'm describing should be trusted with the final decision making? Should the marriage come to a place where people are ready to fall apart? Shouldn't the person who's trustworthy in that capacity be a person who's trusted with the decision making? And if it came to a point where you and your husband were ready to split ways over a decision, wouldn't it be better to submit to the union of that decision and say, I'd rather not, right? Even if it meant deferring.
So,
because I believe that this is built on trust, not on power. And 100%. So I think that's the difference.
100%. But let me give you a counter example then. So like in our marriage, we have different areas of expertise and different amounts of power in different things. He would submit to me in decisions where I have more expertise, actually. And that would probably be the wise thing for him to do because I'm trustworthy in that area. And I would submit to him in the areas where he has more expertise and where he's been trustworthy. And that's the wise thing to do. And that's what I mean by interdependence. And that's what I would mean by, I don't see a difference in as in a role difference. I see a difference in the, and this could be very varied in different marriages, right? Like some marriages, like you might be a CPA or a financial advisor. So like for her to trust your financial decisions, if you've proven to be trustworthy, would be the smart thing to do. And she might be, I don't know, like a childhood education specialist. And so for you to trust her, if she's been trustworthy in that area, would be wise. I don't know that. So for me, I no longer see a position where all of the decisions are being filtered through one person. They're now being weighed in the idea of, like you said, who is trustworthy, who has the expertise, who has the power. Like I do
and
not.
Functionally speaking, best case scenario, both people are trustworthy, functional, communicative.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
When that breaks down.
Yeah.
Then you have a lot of the issues that we're talking about.
Sure.
Right. That's where I think this ends up being kind of a little bit like screwy, is if we're talking about all of the decisions being filtered through one person, we're still talking about two different things, because I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
So I'm talking about all of the decisions being filtered through both people. And when both people can't come to an agreement, one is a casting vote, not because the other is untrustworthy, but because the entire enterprise rests on that. It has to be something where you agree. And if you don't, then there's just no resolve. Like there has to be something that resolves. And that's only in the case of extreme. And it doesn't have to be a case of trustworthiness versus untrustworthy. Actually, like preferably in the best version of this, there wouldn't be a question of trustworthy versus untrustworthiness. There would just be a question of whether or not we know what we're doing. And if we both don't know what we're doing, we're praying to God and we both still don't see an answer, then whatever it is that the person who's the plan we're going to go with, that person bears the responsibility of whatever goes wrong along with it. Both of them ultimately bear that responsibility, but we both know emotionally that that's how that would play out. The person who had the idea, this was your idea, you know what I mean? And so if that comes on, if that's going to crash on anyone's lap, that's what I'm saying. The man should take the brunt of that.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, and I mean, I understand that, because that is how I used to look at it, as like, no, that's a protective role for a man to like have the final decision weight, because then he's responsible for the outcome. But I just don't see that anymore. I don't see a biblical basis for that, and I actually see biblical precedents for that not being the case. For example, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Samson's mother and not the father had to trust the mother who was coming to him saying, hey, this happened and this is what's going to go down. And, so to extrapolate to our situation or our time or age, like I could be deceived about something and the Lord could be showing my husband something, and we're going to have to figure that out. Or he could be deceived about something and the Lord could be showing me something, and I could feel a very strong conviction about it. And it would not be right for me to say, well, I'm going to give the final decision to him if the Lord has revealed something to me that is, essential. And hopefully we have a good enough relationship where we can trust each other, like you said. And I think that's what we're talking about in Christian marriage. We're talking about a partnership where we do trust each other because we have seen growth in character and the reliance on the Lord between each other. So there's just a lot of give and take and growth in that. But for there to be ultimately always one would be to say that the Lord would never reveal something to a wife that he wouldn't reveal to the husband.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've heard people say that, but
they're dumb.
Yeah. And if that's not if that's not the case, then that's kind of breaks that model of like the husband would be ultimately responsible for all the decisions.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's not ultimately responsible all of the decisions. It would be only on the extreme tail end of the edge of the world. And that's the only ones. That's what I'm saying. Functionally, a relationship doesn't come to that, except for in the extremes. And in the case of the extremes, just like war, like you send the man, you don't risk the women and the children. You don't do that.
I mean, yeah. However, like, let's talk extremes again. Extremes would mean that probably there is something extremely wrong in the relationship, right?
No, or with the world. The world outside could be the problem, and you guys don't know how to reach an impasse because of something that's going on that you both can't foresee the outcome of, and you're trying to make good, wise decisions, and you don't know where to go. And especially if it's the case of an extreme.
Yes, and in that case, what if God revealed something to the wife that he did not reveal to the husband? Should not the wife step up and take that?
And she should speak up, yeah.
And take the decision on herself, like if she feels
No, there should be an agreement. And again, if there's not an agreement, then he's just being a pig-headed person. Like that's what I mean. Is like that's not a man taking leadership. That's a man being pig-headed and prideful. If a woman has a better decision than the man does, the man should defer. That's it. But if there isn't a better, that's what I'm saying. In the cases of extremes, there isn't a better. There's an I don't know.
Okay.
Neither of us know. There's not a revelation experience. There's nobody knows, and we have no clue. No answer has come.
Then why do we have to make a decision in that case? If we
I mean, in the case of an extreme, it would be something like the necessity of decision to be made because the future is going to change something.
Okay, and I would again say that would really default to our personal powers, our personal expertise. So again, if it was a health decision in my home, I would be the one. And if it was a security decision in my home, I would not be the one. It would be James. And it would be easy because it's a trust thing and it's based on, experience, expertise, and all of those things. And if it's something like we both have no idea, I don't know, maybe...
That's what I mean, though, is if you both have no idea, if you both had no clue,
Yeah.
and there was
So
no answer coming, and you didn't know who to consult. You know what I mean?
and
Like, in that
in those,
case, would you trust your husband with that gap?
not necessarily. If it's something that implicitly has to be made right now, I would think we would both just give our best arguments and we would come to a decision together on it. And if it's something that can be put off and put down the road, which again, if it's not something like health or security or, an imminent war or something like that, I think we could wait. And that might be the wisest thing to do, would be to say, you know what, we haven't figured this out. Let's wait and see what the Lord reveals, or see what time reveals, or get consult, or go to people that know better.
In a perfect world, that would play out exactly that way.
So,
but most of the time, that's not where the extremes live, right? That's what I mean is, if you get to a point, let's say the scenario is exactly this: you don't know what to do, he doesn't know what to do, no answers are coming, there's no consultation, and you can't reach an agreement. Do you trust your husband?
I mean, it totally depends what it's about.
That's what I mean right there. Is it's difficult because at that point the authority is lacking because the trust isn't there.
No, it's based on what our experiences are in. So it would depend what it's about. It wouldn't be.
Neither of you have experience in this thing, whatever it is. There isn't any experience. There's no advantage on either side.
I can't think of that scenario. And also, I don't think that there's a precedent for like one of us ultimately just always is the default. That to me doesn't make sense anymore. But I get from the perspective of like the husband is always the default. But what you're saying is, I guess rather than because the example, I'm being as vague as possible because the example doesn't matter. What I'm pointing out is the authority is tied to the mutual trust. But mutual trust would mean that he would also trust my authority, the authority that I have over the power that I do have, which would be, whatever that is. I don't know, expertise in certain things, skill in certain things, and my and his authority comes from the powers that he does have, not from a default role. So that's the difference that I'm describing.
I'm not laughing at you. I just read the comments for the first time in like 20 minutes, and I realized that Amber's been trying to raise her hand.
Oh,
and I ignored her entirely.
Amber, just yell. Stop it.
Just now looked over and was like, oh, okay. My bad. I was entirely like entranced in the conversation. This is fantastic.
No, I didn't want to interrupt because it was such a great conversation. I just wanted to like mostly pose a question and a scenario in the question to kind of maybe what I'm hearing here in this back and forth, because it's really is fascinating. But I'm wondering, because it sounds to me like Josh is pointing towards living towards an ideal, and Hannah is living in the gritty reality that the ideal fails in a fallen world. And it sounds very much like a very like an ongoing conversation that we talk about a lot in the Orthodox Church, about like, will you hear people say, well, in Orthodoxy this, and here is like canon says this, but and it's like, here's the canon law standard says X, but there's a whole lot of room between the exalted X of what the ideal of the canon law is to the nitty gritty dirt of everyday life. And there's this idea that's called oikonomia, which means we're not going to hit this standard until we get to the new heaven, new earth perfection. So how do we stay in relationship, still stay in relationship when we don't get to that standard for whatever reason? And there are flexibilities made within, so you don't have to do, like for like an example, like because of medications that I'm on and health things that I'm going through, the standard is to fast completely for 12 hours, but mine's been shortened to 3. So I can still participate in the Eucharist. I don't meet the standard, but it's allowed, because the reality of a fallen world makes it so sometimes we can't hit that standard. And I would point to the apostles. Like, here is a group that was given similar mission together founding the church. But ultimately there's a spokesperson, and that one, as the spokesperson elevated, was St. Peter. And so when at a tie break situation, everybody's equal, but Peter is the one who kind of says, hey guys, the voice of the consensus, but that doesn't exclude their roles as experts. And so you see the women coming in as expert witnesses. You see there is space given to teachers who are experts, to theologians who are experts, to life. Like, this is one of the roles of the diaconate. They are the experts at taking care of the physical needs. And so that is yielded and doesn't need it to be dictated to, because that space is yielded. So I'm just kind of wondering about the interplay of all of this, because there is space made for that in the early church that is continued in the model in the Orthodox Church. But, it doesn't, it is not like a hard, you have to meet this standard or you're a failure. We make room for the realities and the grittiness of life. So I'm just kind of wondering about, as I'm listening to you play out with this dynamic, how much of that is wrestling in that?
I guess my question would be, why would the ideal be? I think that's my question. Is I did see that interpretation before of the ideal being the husband being the leader. But I'm not sure.
Well, what you were talking about before isn't what we're describing now, though.
Right.
That wasn't an ideal. That was an abuse.
What is an abuse? For a husband to be a decision maker on?
No, everything? For the kind of authority you were describing before that you used to affirm. That's not the kind I affirm. Mm-hmm. So we're not. That's like we both reject that.
Well, I reject people taking power over people just because they're bigger. Absolutely. And just because they can. Yeah.
Or just because someone said so. Yeah.
Sure. And I reject that as well. But I think that what had been taught, and this is where you could help me out and tell me what you see is different, because you said, it's not grounded in the essentialness of male or female, and it's not grounded in what God said. So where do you ground the authority that you're seeing, like in as a difference
in self-sacrifice and trust?
So in that case, why is that male and not male and female?
It is male and female, but it's male first.
Why?
Only because Adam was made first, and Eve was someone that was derived from the wholeness of Adam. They became two people coming together, becomes one flesh. Mm-hmm. So this is derived from creation, but it's not just because he said so. God did that for a purpose, right? He did that to reflect the Christ and the church. That was a foreshadowing. And so Christ firmly is the self-sacrificer in the scenario.
So it would be an essentialism then, right? So it would be that they are essentially different, created essentially different in authority.
Well, essentially different in, I guess.
Okay.
Well, yeah, again, if authority is defined the way that I was talking about before, based in self-sacrifice and trust,
as the
then yes.
Primary self-sacrificer then, or the first, or the something in that range. Okay.
Mm-hmm. As in the woman is the pinnacle of creation and should be honored as such.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess Amber, I have a question for you. So the story, right, in Genesis 1 and 2, uses the word Adam for like a human or an earthling or earth being, right? And then Ish and Isha don't happen until we get the separation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So that would actually cause me to question the idea too of like firstness of male, like maleness being first, when they're not actually described as male or female until there's that separating of the two.
Well, and I think we need to back up, and when we're looking at Genesis 1 and 2, Genesis 1 is, except for the first line, pure poetry. And so this is describing in a poetic sense. Mm-hmm. Here is, think of Shakespeare's love sonnet of how humanity came to be. And Genesis 2 has some poetry, but it's more of a narrative type poetry that is kind of explaining, okay, we're going to zoom in and we're going to go from the man that was created and or the Sorry, I got distracted by somebody trying to flag me down over there. That where we started with the first human who is represented as a male, and then we see that in this dream type vision, he watches himself get torn apart in incompleteness that separates into the sameness but differentness that only is complete together. So even in the idea of Adam first, Eve being created second in that order, the fact that Adam is first, even that role is set up so that authority or that headship that is given first is never meant to be apart from the idea of service. So it is meant to be taken from the place of lower that only completes itself together. So it's not like Adam's first, so I get across the finish line first, so I'm more important than you. It's more, this is just kind of the order that it went, but without putting myself in the place of that humility of service first. And that's where in the fall, that gets broken, and man claims authority without service, and that's where you get the abuses that happen. And that's where, like in the Orthodox structure, you see like priests and deacons, priests, and all the way up. The higher up in the structures they get, the lower they are supposed to be in humility and consider themselves underneath. So anyone who is in an ordained role that sees themselves any better than the smallest child in the parish is removed, because that's not their role. Their role starts, ends, and all the way through is in humble service that understands the weight of any decision that is made by anyone. So it's a fallen way of thinking it backwards. If it makes sense, because any kind of hierarchy or authority is never supposed to be wielded without being, as Paul calls himself, the chief of sinners and the most humble in the room, which we fail at miserably and gets abused all the time.
Yeah, I think that description, though, then still falls down into what is the distinctive, like Joshua said, that it's service, that it's a higher requirement for service maybe than a female, or a higher requirement for self-sacrifice.
The female gets the greater glory.
Well, yeah, I know where you're pulling that from would be 1 Corinthians 11, which would, be
and Genesis. Yeah. I'm driving that from Genesis. Paul rephrases it, but I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
I'm still talking about the fact that when God created everything, the first thing he said was not good, was that man was by himself. Then he made Eve, and then that's the pinnacle of creation. The woman is the answer to the first lack. Woman is the answer, right? Yeah. So it's like man has lack. So man is insufficient alone.
Yeah.
Right?
But so
woman is the height of that's the last thing God made. In that order of operations, there was Eve emerges, and finally you have the fulfillment. And Adam says, "Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh," identifies with her that deeply, and that's good. Like, it's all good.
Yeah,
Adam failed her by not taking responsibility in the garden the same way. Like, he should have taken responsibility for what was happening, and instead he joined what was happening. It's the same kind of thing. And shouldn't be reactionary. And so we have a lot of weird stuff because of our experiences. We've been jaded. We've never been in a garden, right? Like, we don't know what it would have been like to be in a perfect headship submission situation. We don't even know what that looks like, because we don't have that experience outside of Christ and the church. And even the church isn't perfectly submitted at this point, right? So it's like, we really don't have much of a model for that. But that's why I would call it an ideal, because it matches the Christ and the church. Not because it has anything to do with might or with power or with decision making explicitly. It has to do with the fact that man and woman in marriage was meant to be a mystery of the gospel, which is Christ and the church. And so I look at man as the one who is self-sacrificial
for the betterment of the other, and the other is self-sacrificial for the elevation of the Christ. That's interplay, that's intersubmission. But that's not to say that Christ is lesser than the church. Christ puts himself beneath the church to elevate her, right?
And I just want to clarify a little bit more of the Hebrew thought here, because that might help a little bit. Because there's two things that ish isha is grammatically, one isn't better than the other. One's not higher than the other. It is a dualistic oneness, that they're the same but different, but not different but the same. Like it's hard to explain how they're the same but the same. And Hebrew and to some extent Greek, but Hebrew really loves to do this, where it will take and collect a pile of things that are the same, that have the same value. Nothing is better than the other. Nothing is more special than the other. And pull out one of them, sometimes at random, sometimes not. It's hard to say, but we'll pull out and hold up one to say, this is the example of the pile. And look like it elevates it to make it better than the pile, but it doesn't really. It just is like, here's the pile, but I'm going to make an example of the thing to represent the pile. So it looks like it's better than the pile, but it's not better than the pile. It's just, here's the example of the thing. And that's also some of what's going on in the creation narrative too, because you've got the pile of two. Here's the one that, look at this one, but that doesn't make this one any less. It's just this is what Hebrew does. It just it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain to modern English speakers how this concept actually works, where you can have a pile and one thing be elevated, but not really elevated, but elevated, but not. So it's kind of like, here's the thing, and then we're going to dogpile the other things on top of the thing, because the thing's not really more important, but it's just held up as the thing, as the example.
It's exemplified, not elevated.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I guess just to full circle, that would be the problem that's presented in that chapter is the aloneness, and the solution is the being brought back together, right? Pulled apart and brought together to make the oneness. And so that's where I really struggle to see a higher level.
Right. Well, that's a mirror of the days of creation, because there is a creating of space and a filling of space.
Yeah. And a separating.
All of it is not complete until there is the creation of the container and the filling of the container. The container and the filler don't have more value than the other. They just don't exist in fullness without each other. So Adam is the container. Eve is the filler of the container. That doesn't mean that one has more value than the other. It just means without being filled, Adam is empty container, and Eve is the filler that completes his. So together they are a complete, like a completeness that is the pattern in Genesis 1, that without, you can't have the filling of the thing without the container, because it goes everywhere in chaos. So they are dependent, mutually dependent.
Yeah.
A container means nothing. Yes, the container means nothing without something to hold. And something to hold means nothing without the container. And so God says, here's a container. Look around, container. You got nothing to hold. And then hang on, I'm going to rip you apart, rebuild the container, and then give you an equivalent value to fill. And the filling is actually held up in more esteem, because the filler is the giver of life, and the container is the organizer of life. And the container actually is jealous of the contents, because the contents bring forth life, and the container just contains it. They don't get to do the cool part of the bringing forth of life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Make me cry.
That's a cool picture. And
full disclosure, that's kind of what I meant by castle and treasure, but it didn't sound as cool.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, I don't Yeah, and I think that's why we are so close to actually probably the way we would consider a marriage to operate would be very similar. But and that's I think the point of it being in Christ, and that's why Paul was, I think, saying like, hey, you guys are missing something when you're talking about like when you're arguing over firstness and who has the most honor, you're forgetting that in Christ in Christ we're interdependent, and that every one of us come through God. And so I think that is the kind of the full stop resolution of what it means to have a marriage and be Christian or be in the body of Christ, is that it's everything that I am or everything that he is coming together for the good of the other. And like you said, that's where I struggle with. I'm not sure. I definitely see how Paul called out sacrifice for the man. And my thought in that is because definitionally to be a woman, especially if you have kids, I can't think of something more self-sacrificial or that requires death more than childbearing. And I think for the man, the partner, to understand like his role and his contribution, took that language from Paul to say, hey, also, you are also laying down your life in this relationship as well.
That was why I called myself more expendable, was exactly that point. Yeah. And it's not an insult to men, but any men that are listening, I'm not saying that you're valueless and that your women should treat you like doormats. No. Because I know a lot of men struggle with that and it's been a really crap time. I'm not saying that. I'm saying self-sacrifice is what it is because you hand yourself over to that end, right? That means that the person you tie yourself to in that lifelong bind needs to be somebody you're sure you can trust that with. That's what a lot of men are not taught when they're younger. So I'm not telling any men that are listening to this who are young men who are unmarried, please do not misunderstand me. Do not be a fool, but do not get it twisted. She is not yours, right? You are the expendable one. And when I say that, I mean in the most like fundamental bottom of the barrel. Life is going to give you something that is damaging and take something from you. Do you sacrifice your family for yourself, or do you sacrifice yourself for your family? Right? In that instance, the women and the children should go, and the men become expendable. That's what I'm talking about, is that sacredness, the elevation, in that sense, the elevation of the woman and the child. This is what I think society, in a modern society, has gotten terribly wrong. We've forsaken the virgin and the child. We've forsaken the mother. We think that that's just so profane and common now that we even target babies. It's crazy where we've gone with this. And so in that sense, I'm looking at an ancient world and going, they had something right that we had wrong. Right? But in the modern world, we have lots of stuff stupidly wrong. Especially our self-referential pride that makes us think that the marriage is about me and how you can best serve me. That's not marriage. That's business. That's a mistake.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with any of that. So I do. Yeah. And I just think that maybe the pictures are there for us to recognize that as a mother, you are actually putting yourself in that position already. You're already laying down your life. Your life is at risk, and you have sacrificed a large portion of your actual physical being to bring life into the family. And that the call to the men is to recognize, like, hey, their role is the same, like in a different way, but also they're called to lay
the outside rather than the inside. Yeah. And so men sacrifice their bodies externally. Women sacrifice their bodies internally. That's one of the ways that she was talking about over here. She was talking about them being the same and also different. They're exactly the same in that sense. You will be a self-sacrifice, but to what end? Right? The woman's end is unto the children The man's end is unto the women and the children. The children's end is unto the parents, right? And so that's where the honor flows. That is a flow of honor, right? And so before authority is even declared or used, that's the flow of honor, right? So before power, before authority, before anything like decision making is necessary, in the terms of, let's say, life and death coming upon the home, that is the flow of honor. The children defer to the parents, the woman guards the children, and the man guards everything else. He becomes the first line of expendable defense. That's an ideal. That's what I mean by ideal. That's where I think the authority actually comes into any sort of play, is because of that is the most threatening thing about reality, is that you don't have external control. It is always a threat. What is on the outside is always more overwhelming than what you have on the inside. And so because the external life is always that threat, we're not just looking at what's on the inside. On internal affairs in that way, yeah, totally. Equality is that medicine that keeps things copacetic in exactly that way. It works, and it should work. And we should have that interdependence and trust. But when the external world becomes the threat that it always ends up being, and especially in those times of extremes that, like I said, conflict, war, physical violence, threat, animality, whatever it is, those are the times when these things, as far as authority in that powered sense, have any relevance. Those are the times. For me, in a biblical hierarchy, those are the times when those kind of powers have any relevance. I think that's probably the best way to clarify that, because that's what I'm talking about when I say extremes. I'm talking about those extremes.
Well, I could agree with you in the sense that in general, the majority of men are physically stronger, and so therefore are responsible for that physical power to aid in that sort of way, right? Be the protection.
That's what I mean by an ideal.
Yeah.
There are idiosyncrasies in any ideal, but that's the ideal.
Yeah. Okay. And that's, I guess, where it breaks apart for me, is because I see it now much more easily explained in this idea of like both of us bringing whatever we have to be interdependent, because male and female aren't as simple as, and we don't live in a time that is necessarily as, we're not as physically in threat all the time. We're not actually maybe as dependent on a powerful, more powerful human to survive as often.
I think that's probably true. We live in a very privileged country, and that gives us a different scenario than most of human history. So we're living in exception. We are living in exception.
Okay.
I make no bones about that. We are definitely living in an exception. That's not normal.
Right.
Yeah. Safety of that kind is not normal.
So to me, the picture or the ideal has to work in all the ways that humans can be human. So whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
So because we're not living in a time where there's war, there's, we're worried about our safety minute by minute.
Then those extremes should come up that much less. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So,
but in the case of those extremes, you agree that that's the ideal, right?
Well, I would agree that, whoever has the power. So I would say that there could be an exception to the exception, right? Like in the time of war, whatever, maybe you married a Navy SEAL wife or something, and she has the know-how and the strength and all of the things. And I don't know, I think she should probably step up and,
she should help. Yeah. But that's also a modern exception. For most of human history, that wasn't the case. Women weren't trained as soldiers, even if they were tall and huge and physically more muscular or whatever. That wasn't like a thing that they did. Totally. And women weren't lining up for that either. It's not like they were looking for that.
No, I would just say that there are,
But it is part of the inborn male fantasy to be a soldier and be the protector and die in the service of that. That's actually an inborn male fantasy. It's not one for women.
Yeah, probably. But I wouldn't say for all either. I would say that there's exceptions.
No, but it is the without exception, the average. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I would just say even in Old Testament, we have examples of, I don't know, I would say like Abigail, who was willing to face David and step in for her household. She had the know-how and she had the, whatever. I'm not saying she had physical strength over, is it Nabor? Oh, I can't remember his name. But she took the courageous role of confronting the doom that was going to come on her household, and she was praised for that. And so, yeah, there's going to be generalities in ways that men and women operate together. Like a man is never going to bear a baby, but but I just, I don't understand that in a way of over or hierarchy anymore, I guess. But
well,
the
that's
way
what
that
I mean. Is I feel like
the
the difference is the word hierarchy. Then,
okay,
if I used a different word and I called it just the generic ideal of God's design, you see what I mean? Like if hierarchy, the word hierarchy, because it connotes what you were talking about before, happens to be a stumbling block, I'll just replace the word. What I mean specifically is self-sacrifice and trustworthiness. And then that willing to take on responsibility based on that fact, so the mutual submission is there. But then there is still this role to be played where the women uniquely can only be birth givers. That's a unique role to women.
yeah,
Males have a unique role in the same way. That's the same but different. That's what I mean. That's what I'm laying out.
okay, but then that where I would say that becomes interdependent is the fact that a woman is actually being self-sacrificial and trustworthy in the same amount, or but like you said, different ways. Like in the bearing of children, in the raising of children, that is a self-sacrificial, trustworthy thing that she has to do, right? And the
And
male,
that's something that's on the inside. That's something internal to the family. Like this is where the containment language she was using becomes relevant. Container, the woman has authority inside and should have authority inside. And when relevant, the man should submit to that authority on the inside. But the man plays the containment. That means he's the barring from the threat outside rather than a threat to you. He's not a threat to you, and he shouldn't be in competition with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's where this all goes very wrong in our modern context. We've gone wrong. I agree with that for sure. There isn't a competition. Competition is wrong. Hierarchy is not in accordance with competition, especially if biblical hierarchy is to humble oneself to be a servant of all, and authority is to bow. If authority is to bow, then we're not in competition. And so that's what I mean is if I replace the word hierarchy with something else, and authority now means to bow rather than to be lording over in that weird secular sense.
So I and this is probably going to just sound pedantic
glowing
and annoying
right now. What is going on here? Oh, there we go. It's my camera. I was like, what is happening? Sorry.
I guess that's the thing, though. That's where I struggle, and that's why I've seen it different, is because I think we are both bowing, as in like Ephesians.
Well, we are sure.
Okay.
But do you acknowledge the containment and inside difference? Because that's the one that I think makes the difference of what we're talking about.
Yeah. If you're saying like, hey, we have different, like, we are not the same. We are not equal in, mass or strength or, even whatever. But so I'm not disagreeing that there's difference, right? So you could, if you want to define it as like a container and a filling, sure. I just don't see how that's ordered. So hierarchy by definition is an ordered, like a ranking, right? And authority has to do with in that ranking, the right to whatever it is, make decisions. Whereas I see the pictures more fit towards like a head and a body that are essential to be together for life. You don't have life without them both together. And a container and a filler, I guess that picture would be like they have no purpose without each other. But there's not a ranking there.
No, there's not a ranking. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying that exactly. Yeah, there's no ranking. That's a worldly hierarchy. That's not a biblical one. So that's not even on the table. That we both reject that. That's what I was saying from the beginning. We both reject that. There isn't a ranking. Men are not ranked higher than women. If anything, women are ranked higher than men. That's what gives them the greater glory, makes men expendable. I'm the castle, not the treasure, period. That's why I'm the container. It's the same thing as if you had water but no cup. It just gets all over the place. The cup is not more important than the water. The cup is only functioning because of the water, but the water can't function properly without the cup. The cup is thereby of first necessity, but it is meaningless without the water. And so they're interdependent, but one is primary, but they're not ranked. Like, that's not the thing. They're not better or worse. They're different and same, but one is primary and the other is derivation. But that is not a value-laden system at all.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I can fully agree with that.
Okay.
I guess then the only difference would be the working out of that. And we agree that when there isn't probably sin or conflict or strife, that we probably would have the exact same way to work out how we operate in our marriage.
We would be of one mind, I'm assuming. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's what one flesh is eventually supposed to be approximating, is that one mind, because you've gotten so intimate toward one another's knowing that you don't have the dissension of competition anymore. Because that's really what happens in the first bits of marriage, is you guys really have to feel out where each other's edges are to figure out where those roles even exist. And that's a negotiation. And if that's not a negotiation, we're not talking about biblical hierarchy anymore, because that's an internal affair. You see what I mean? In relation to the outside world, I'm the first line of defense before the wife. But on the inside, there's no defense. We're not in competition. That shouldn't be the case. That's a wrong picture. We're not at war.
So maybe that's why I have this distinctive, is that I feel like in the body of Christ, we are inside. So we are in the body of Christ, where we're mutually submitting to one another. Yeah.
Bingo. Christ is the container. Yeah. That's exactly right. Exactly. Yes, we are in Christ. He's the container. We are the contained. We require him.
So, and that's where I would see marriage and the body functioning very, very similarly, where we're gifted differently. We have different strengths, but we use those for the building up of one another, like mutually within Christ. Right. And that's exactly how I see marriage. But yeah, I don't know. That's, I would say.
Well, let's say even with the symbolism of go ahead, Amber. Sorry.
Okay, I just want to really quickly point out, in all of that language, when you're looking at the Greek, when Christ is the container, we are all in the body of Christ. When Paul is saying there is no male or female, because everyone assumes the female role as that which is contained. So men become women the body of Christ.
That means I am the feminine in relation to the great masculine. That's exactly what that means. It's why I get to be a bride. My submission thereby has its meaning, because he's the self-sacrificer. Thank you. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. But then I was going to say, even in the symbolism of a body, if the head is not charged over the body, we're run by the flesh. And so there is, let's say, a dance of order rather than a priority, because if you cut the head from the body doesn't survive. And if you cut the body from the head doesn't survive. So there's no value-laden priority, but there ought to be an ordered priority, or else the body's running the head. And that's just hedonism. That's something gone wrong.
Yeah. I just don't know that was the understanding of Paul, or the picture he was making, because he's talking about the body growing up into the head. So the head being the source of life,
like Adam to Eve.
Yeah. Whereas like modern medicine, we know that the brain is like more of like a central command center, but also that's kind of misguided, because the body tells the head what it needs, and the head then gets it for the body.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So the body tells the needs, and the head provides. Yeah. Precisely.
So it's not like
the head provides because of that priority. That's what I mean, is the head provides because of that priority, and the body tells the head the needs because the head is the prioritizing provider. That's how that should work. That makes the body more important to the head, not more important than the head.
Right. And neither are more important. And, that would be the same thing that you're saying. But also, I don't know that the picture to me is not a decision maker, right? It's a
right. I wasn't talking about decisions either.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the symbolism.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about symbolism. At that point, I'm talking about symbolically. We have the body. The head is the top of the body. Top means priority, the height. That's why God is the most high.
Mhm.
There's a lot of
Mhm.
connotation where
Prominent.
this mirrors itself, right?
Sure.
And so
Mhm.
in that sense, it's the same thing as sky and land, or land and water. The
Mhm.
land contains the water and rises above it. The water is a feminine, chaotic symbol. The land is a masculine, ordered symbol. However, in relation to the sky, the land is feminine, right? So these are permeable boundaries, like I was talking about. But
Mhm.
symbolically, they have a language and they play themselves out in a really coherent way.
Mhm.
But those things
Mhm.
have their
Mhm.
own idiosyncrasies, and idiosyncrasies don't break the pattern. The
Mhm.
pattern isn't established by perfect consistency. The
Mhm.
pattern is established by the overall intended order and function of the very good creation in Genesis 1, right?
Mhm.
And we see that even though the creation presently is not the very good creation of Genesis 1, it still works rather automatically in the way that God seems to intend, and works better when man takes headship.
I guess I don't. Yeah, that word to me too is rests on the idea of decision maker or ultimate decision maker, and I just don't see that anymore. So
Well,
I
let's
see
say
it as
if there
prominent.
could be another word besides headship, because I'm just
Yeah.
using biblical language. It seems to have been tainted by bad experiences. So I'll use a
Right.
different word of your choosing. I'll use whatever word you prefer. It
Well, the
could be
word is
sourcehood. It doesn't much matter to me.
well.
It
The
could
word
be
is head.
fountainhead, whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the
The
same
word
thing.
is head, but assuming that it's a ship is where where I think it gets awry, because especially because of our modern day thinking of, like, well, the head of the company, the head of the whatever. It's always about the decision making capacity, or the
Right, exactly. But that's what I mean is I'm reverse the order. I'm not basing this off on anything the world has done wrong with it. I'm trying to derive back to a biblical model of an ideal, not the
Yes.
things that have gone wrong. And
Okay.
because there's no shortage. There's a whole wealth of things that we can point to for how
Mhm.
this can be abused and go terribly wrong.
Mhm.
The same thing that
So
you have free will is also something of great potential and power that can go terribly wrong, like terribly wrong, right? But that doesn't mean that free will can't be exercised in accordance with an ideal, right? It just means that it can go horribly wrong, right? So in the same sense, being the fountainhead of provision towards something
Mhm.
doesn't make you of greater value. It makes the thing you provide for of more value.
yeah, I'm not sure if it's more, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, more value to me.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
wife has more value to me
Yeah.
than I do. And
Yeah.
that should be the case.
Yes. I agree with that. So I think that's the
I
only.
think that's what would make me worthy of any level of submission whatsoever, is exactly that I believe that my wife is of more value than me, and I treat her that way. Otherwise, I would not recommend that she submit to me as a husband if I was not that way. And I wasn't always that way. And she was not submitting to me when I wasn't that way. And so seeing functionally the difference, that is fact. My wife is amazing. That is fact. If I was not treating her that way, it would be my failure. You know what I mean? And I take the responsibility for that too. That's what I mean too, is that it's the voluntary acceptance of responsibility and obligation grants the exercise of authority, and the release and receiving of authority is there based in trust rather than power. It can have the exercising basis of power, because again, I would be the one that would go to war for my wife. I would not send her, even if she was bigger than me.
Sure, 100%. Well, but what you just said, let me say it back to you, because I can hear it now. What you just said was that you define headship as sacrifice and trust.
Yes,
right?
That's the basis of. Yeah.
Okay. And you said my wife should not submit to me unless I was trustworthy, right? And then you and that's what gives you the authority. But you said that trustworthiness is based in your sacrifice, your ability to sacrifice and be trustworthy. And then your wife would then submit to you as well. Well, isn't sacrifice and submission definitionally very, very much interdependent, is what I would say.
Internally. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yep.
So yeah, I guess then I don't understand what definitionally authority is in that case. So the wife is to submit to the husband, yes, and the husband is a sacrifice to the wife. And therefore you have this beautiful picture of growth that happens because you are both acting in a trustworthy way with one another. And you can depend on one another.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we've gotten there.
Okay.
I feel like that's it. To be honest with you, like the reason why I believe self-sacrifice is the basis of my authority is because that's the thing that I can do to best mirror Christ in a marriage.
Yeah.
That's the best I can do to mirror Christ in a marriage, is to sacrifice myself for her like he did for the church. And that's the biblical basis for that. And the mandate of her submission should be tied to that. The fact that I am being like Christ. Now, a woman who submits to a husband who is not like Christ can still be blessed in that. The same way Sarah was blessed because she followed Abraham's idiocy. But Abraham was a dummy for doing what he did. He shouldn't have done that. God blessed them anyway. That wasn't an ideal. That was a failure that God took reins on and blessed. So that is not a good example.
Yeah.
But it is a good basis for illustrating why even in the worst case scenario, submission is still blessed by God. But if you go into the back end of that and say, what ought there be? There ought to be a man who mirrors Christ and sacrifices himself to the betterment and the elevation of his wife and his children, right? And that his life should be lived to that end. His whole life should be sacrificed, whether it's just, I'm going to die for you because someone has a gun, or I'm going to live for you, because that also is a self-sacrifice. And I count those two things to be the same as one another. And because I enact that, I believe it makes sense for her to submit to me as trustworthy when I'm making decisions that we can't agree on. I think I've proven the fact that I can fulfill that role. And even if I couldn't, God could still bless her socks off, even if I'm a moron, right? So she's safeguarded in submission one way or the other because God's got the reins, right? But in terms of a proper and ideal function, in relation to the external, the man has that authority. In relation to the internal, there isn't a competition. Hierarchy is mutual submission in that case, unless there's an impasse. And that impasse is solved by trust, not by power. That's biblical hierarchy.
Would you trust your wife if she said, hey, God revealed this to me, we've got to do this thing? Whatever it is, I don't know.
Yeah, I can say I've done that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I totally agree with you then how you're describing it. Because if you would think there would be a difference in the fact that you would have to be the one that God would have to reveal it to, and she has to trust you all the time, then we have a problem. And I feel like a lot of people use that as a example, like, well, no, that they have to go, it has to come through me.
That's pride.
Right, husband. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
pride.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we pretty much agree. We probably just have different words to describe what we're saying. We have an idea that we are both using whatever things God has given us for the betterment of the other and to lift up the other person.
And I think just so I'm understanding, like, not so that you can concede anything.
Yeah.
Do you feel like we still agree, even in relation to the way I'm describing authority internally and externally?
I'm not sure, because I
That's fair.
Okay. I would have to think about that more, because I'm not sure.
That's totally fair.
Yeah. Because like the way you describe it as like an external to the world pressure for survival. I can see that, but I also could say, like, that's, to me, it has to work. That model would have to work in all the ways that it means to be human, and in all the times and ages and stages of humanity, for it to be a biblical, for all times and places principle. And like I was saying, like, I don't think we're in the same kind of scenario that we have been in the past, where we need male protection in that sense. And so
well, maybe not in America, because we're
Yeah.
exceptionally safe. But again, that
Right.
is an extreme and an abnormality.
Sure.
So in terms of a functional all times, all places,
Mhm.
what we have in America is not that. What we have in America is the opposite of that. So
Mhm.
what I'm describing is far more that basis than what we have in America. We are not an example of humanity here in America. We are an exception. And it is a very unstable exception. We are very easily within a decade of failure at any time. And then we would have to revert exactly back to what people on the other side of the world are going through, which is exactly the same type of reliance I'm talking about. So we're in a bubble right now. We're in a bubble. I can't judge anything on that basis.
Yeah, but I think where I have come to is the idea that whoever God has given the strength to is who is then responsible to use that for the good of the other. And like the generality is it's the male that's going to be stronger, right, and better at protection than the female, for sure. But
well, physically, yeah. I mean,
yeah, but I
that's
could
not
say
the only thing. Yeah.
Well, okay, but yeah, I could say that isn't always the case, and that's why, to me, saying that this is always the case, the man is always responsible for that. I don't understand that, because, that isn't true.
Well,
So,
even symbolically, there's always exceptions to a rule because the world flips upside down. This is a different conversation, though.
yeah, okay.
So we can talk about symbolism. I would much prefer that because it's less controversial and it gets us into a place where we have a much more expansive kind of conversation. But I think that's probably a different conversation. But I would be totally willing to have that one. Because symbolism is really remarkable. And I can give you an example. Let's say you have the two archetypes of a rebel and a king. Who's good and who's evil? You don't know without a story, because archetypes aren't good or evil. They're not value laden. They're symbols. Symbols aren't value laden. They're contextually laden. And so the same thing is true about almost anything else. Symbols are not a wholesale one-for-one language of any kind. They're a contextual language. And without context, they mean next to nothing. They're just stand-ins or containments, right? The same thing as man by himself is just a stand-in. He's just a containment. He needs something, right? So symbols can be their opposites as well. In the case of Moses and Pharaoh, Moses is the rebel against the wicked king. And yet when they leave, Moses becomes the king in the wilderness against the wicked rebel Korah. And so those things flip-flop, and they are permeable categories just the same. This is how symbolism works. So it isn't a stringent, systematic category, because that's not what the Bible, but the Bible's not a systematic book anyway. So I reject those categories.
Okay. Well, that makes more sense to me then, because the way that I think about things are more of like a metaphysical reality, right? And if something is a metaphysical like reality, or if it's a truth, then a truth can't be untrue at any time. Right. And so,
but truth is contextual also.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Well, I can say it's hot outside.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
that could be true.
Okay.
Objectively, or it could be true opinionated, or by default, or by comparison.
Totally.
But if Arizona's hotter than me right now, but it is hot right now. Okay. Right.
I
but
guess
it would be true to say Arizona's hot. And if I said Arizona's hot and I said, yeah, I'm hot. No, I'm not really that hot actually compared to Arizona. And so there's kind of a gradient of extremes also. And so there's lots of movement. Truth is not a dead thing that stays still. Truth is a living thing that moves around a lot.
Okay. So in what you're describing, you're just describing like the different ways to describe something, right? But I mean the word truth by meaning something that is either true or false, and that something can be both true and false. Like just the very simple laws of like contradiction or non-contradiction, meaning.
Well, symbolism doesn't care about reason.
Yes. Yes. And that's where
but that doesn't mean it's false or fictional. Reason needs symbolism.
Sure. To just
because otherwise we can't communicate. We need metaphor and symbol to communicate. That's how we bridge the gaps. Yeah. Otherwise we can't reason together. So reason relies on symbolism. Symbolism doesn't rely on reason. Those are backwards. Symbolism is an intuitive prior experience to reason. Reason is based on the pieces that symbolism can grant us.
Yes. So there's an ultimate thing that is actually true or false about.
Sure. You mean like everything. God?
Yeah.
God is true.
Yes. And he
Yes.
can't be false. And there's no shadow of turning with him. And he is light. And he is, all the things that he is. And there isn't an edge where it doesn't hold up. Right?
I think he's probably about the only thing that's like that, though.
Okay. So that's where I think maybe some of these things get me. Because I viewed the Bible in that way as well. Instead of more of maybe in a way of like I'm still going to tell you that the Bible is true.
It
but
is.
Yes.
Amen.
But it isn't. There's a lot of symbolism and story and narrative and stuff for us to figure out and understand like what's going on with the biblical revelation. Right. And it's not true as in the way that Jesus standing in front of me as a reality is, because it's language. It has been communicated in language, which is symbolic.
Yes.
Okay.
Language is symbolic.
Okay. So that's the part where with language, we are trying to describe a truth. And that truth doesn't have squishy edges. But our symbols always break down somewhere.
Well, our language breaks down somewhere.
Yeah.
Because it's reliant on symbols, and symbols are not articulate and reasoned. They're implicit. And so that's why I'm saying we should have this conversation.
Yeah.
We should have that conversation.
But I think that's the struggle. That's the struggle we're having then, is that I want to have a principle or a way to look at something that I've like, oh, okay, I've anchored this on a truth. And before, my way of looking at that was the truth is men lead, women follow. That is the truth of the cosmos that God created. So
truth has to be static.
Well, yeah, because for it to be, well, yeah, and honestly, that's the problem is God is not static and he's relational and he is still true. But yeah, I think that's the shift in my understanding of what relationship is and my lack of understanding of what relationship was before. And I really think that, and this might, I might be using the wrong word, but for me, the understanding of hierarchy it's not relational in that way.
Well, the hierarchy you were describing isn't. I agree with you.
Right.
That's why we're on the same page with that one.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
And I would say
truth and incarnation. You're funny. You're a funny lady. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Oh yeah. No, you know what, Hannah? I have a show where I talk about symbolism and scripture analysis all the time. You should try coming on and we'll explore something together. Not marriage or male and female hierarchy. Perhaps the symbolism of male and female would be a really neat starting point, or the not male of female. Let's say masculine and feminine, because those are actual categories. Yeah. Male and female are biological categories. Let's say masculine and feminine would be a really neat thing to explore.
Would be.
Within the framework of the scriptural narratives, because anecdotes get too twisty. I'd say if we look at the Bible and we look at some of the ways that these things kind of come together, I think I would be able to more sufficiently convince you that truth has movement because of the fact life is movement and true is living. The truth is living. And if he's living and we are in him and have our being and movement within him, I believe that even in that, we see truth to be something that is fixed and sturdy, but also rather fluid and movable. Okay. It's very interesting.
I actually completely agree with that. Yeah. And that's the whole idea of relationship and life. It's fluid, but it's very hard to break away from this Greek way of thinking of,
well, especially the Enlightenment part of it, because we're post-Enlightenment Protestant folk, and we think in systematic categories. We've been trained our whole lives to do that because we grew up in a scientific advent. But the Bible wasn't written to those people.
Right.
They got that all kinds of weird. We went way weird after the advent of science, and we started to treat the universe like a dead mechanism rather than like a thing we were charged with caring for, like a like a person, right? Like if you thought of nature as a personhood in its own right, not a conscious personhood, but something of value and personhood that can in its own right submit to God, and we were given charge over her, we've
Wow.
done a piss poor job of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. That's yeah.
You'll
Ugh.
love Cosmic Corner. And you're invited too, Amber. You are. You're I'm not dissing you. I'm inviting you. We can have the incarnation conversation on your channel though.
Oh, that sounds fun. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That'd be awesome.
All right. I know we had set 90 minutes for the kind of the duration of this, so I don't want to shut down a great conversation, but we are at 1 hour and 46 minutes here, so we're kind of at so we could do another part and continue this, or y'all can go, you know, just Josh just dissed me, go take this to Cosmic Corner and finish over there. My poor little channel. That's okay. No, it's been a lot of fun. So I think I would really kind of like to hear just kind of your individual like takeaways from this conversation, and maybe some thoughts for the direction where this conversation can keep going. And I think that would be a really great way to wrap us up. So I'm going to let Hannah have the last word since she went first. So Josh, why don't you go ahead and give your sum up thoughts, and then we'll let Hannah go.
My first thought is I appreciate you, Hannah, and I can see you as an image of God, and you are a remarkable person, and you have been very compelling and very easy to listen to. And so I thank you for your time. Not everybody's willing to put themselves in a vulnerable position to have to answer for anything, let alone answer to someone they disagree with or think they disagree with. We didn't fundamentally end up disagreeing very much, except maybe about terminology. But I think that ended up being much more fruitful, especially because the end of the conversation kind of turned into something where I feel like I probably should have mentioned more about how much more what I'm talking about is informed by biblical symbolism than by grammar or systematic categories. That probably would have landed a little bit easier, but I'm almost glad that came up last because it illumines most of what I said before in a different way, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that was helpful. And I hope that people that are listening start to think about Genesis 1 in a more serious way, because what we have talked about here is a reason why you should study Genesis 1 for the rest of the year, basically, right? Like that is a place you can live. You can go back to. It'll never have a bottom. I promise. It'll never have a bottom. And it's so good, right? I challenge people to continue having this conversation in a way that honors the person you're talking to more than your own need for correctness. Because if you have a need for correctness, you won't have a need for understanding. You won't have a desire for understanding, and you won't have mutual understanding. You'll have just the contention of disagreement. And so if you want to move past that and have conversations that don't smell like bitter failure when you walk away from them, you should probably back off a little bit from correctness and try listening. It's a good thing. Ask questions and give the space. You know, I hope people take from this the fact that we walked into this conversation last month thinking we had a fundamental disagreement, and we walk out of it today realizing we had a fundamental agreement and a difference of vocabulary and a difference in experience, maybe, right? But I think ultimately what we're doing is looking at the same thing and trying to come to something that makes sense. I encourage people to do so while zooming out, because we often are very reliant upon our own experiences to be our primary source of information. Heaven forbid, right? Because what do I know? Seriously. Like, what do I know? You know what I mean? I need more than me. I need to go outside of that. So that's why these conversations are necessary. I think that people should come away from this wondering how they can better connect with people.
I love that. Thank you. I really appreciated this conversation too. And I think you did exactly that. I think you modeled very well what it means to listen to someone else's point of view and try to understand and give meaningful frame of reference for where you're coming from and what you're thinking. So I really appreciated getting to understand you more and your point of view more. And I really appreciate that you listened well. I think what I took away from this a lot was I'm actually really excited to continue growing in the area of understanding the Bible in a different way than I had my whole life. And I think that's a really cool thing about the Bible, right? Is like there's no end. It's just this continuous, if it draws us into closer relationship with God, it can be to this continuous process, which is awesome. I think the one thing I would say is to, like Josh was saying, these kind of conversations are essential because we've become very much a polarized society where it's easy to just put people in different categories and dismiss them. And so not doing that, I think, is really, really important for our growth as people and as a body of Christ. And number two, I would just like to just put a little bit of, caution or thought in there and recognize that a lot of vocabulary that's been taught as the right, correct biblical way to think about marriage or different things has really become weaponized and become a language of harm. And so maybe as we wade into these discussions, recognizing where people are coming from and what they have experienced in their life or their marriages or their homes is really, really, really important to not missing where their heart is. So that's it. And thank you, Amber, for hosting this. It's been really fun.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for being up for this. And I'm so glad we actually got to have this conversation instead of all of the glitches that we had last time, because this was fantastic.
Amen.
And I just love the fact that the two of you were able to sit down. And I love there's just like vocabulary gets in the way a lot and causes a lot of confusion, a lot of arguments that shouldn't even be there, because words themselves are meaningless without the meaning behind the words. And so getting to the meaning behind the words has been a very beautiful thing to watch. And I also just wanted to, because I think it's absolutely amusingly hilarious, because at the very beginning, Hannah, you mentioned watching Mike Winger and that women's series. That series, I watched that. That is number one, how I ended up meeting Nick Quint, how I ended up on YouTube, and how I ended up as Orthodox is because of watching that series by Mike Winger. So Mike Winger, Ray Lubeck, and Joshua Davidson are three of the main people that are responsible for me becoming Orthodox. And so it's absolutely... It's really fun. So I think there's weird connections everywhere, and I absolutely love it because that's funny. So also be careful what you watch on YouTube, because you never know. I watched Mike Winger video, and now I'm Eastern Orthodox. Like, you never know what's going to happen. So just roll with it, and because truth will find you. Christ will find you where you are. So thank you both so much. This has been a blast. And I just so happy. And so this was awesome. This was an awesome video. And I would love to have you guys back again sometime. So find something to not disagree about so we can come back and do this again, because this was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed the whole thing. So, and tomorrow, I have a video with Spencer. We're going to be talking about another episode of how to read the hard parts of the Bible. That's going to be awesome, because we're going to get into suffering, and we're going to dig deep into suffering. And so that was going to be part 2 of part 4. So it's part 5, but it's actually part 4, part 2. So it's kind of, it should be, and then next week, my friend Adam Tippett from Linguist Amo is coming, and we're going to talk about the baddies of the Old Testament or typologies of sanctification. So that's going to be a really fun discussion, I think. And then on the next Thursday, I think, on the 30th, on the 30th, My old thesis advisor and TA professor, Dr. Amber Dillon, is coming to talk about her new book about the intertextuality of John the Baptist. So that's also, I read it before it came out as her TA. I got to help proof it, and it's an amazing book. So she's going to come talk about that. So excited, can't wait. And so there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming out on my channel coming up here in the next few weeks. So thank you both for coming. This was fantastic. And just remember that every day we are working on taking steps of waking up to the mystery of how beautiful God is. Take care and be blessed.